The idea of a time disconnect between what vendors can deliver and what customers actually need is an important one, and it makes me think about the beginning process of where a charge starts. Today, the physician is accustomed to spending probably not more than 3 to 4 seconds maximum on financially documenting what he did or she did. There's a real-time disconnect there, because anything beyond 3 to 5 seconds is way too much time for a physician. And that gap exists between, if you're a software vendor and you think that it may take 5 to 10 to 15 seconds to get the charge captured for the administrative side of the house, that doesn't seem like much time. But to a physician who's busy and is seeing 45 to 50 patients a day, it's a tremendous amount of time. So that's another huge gap between what the reality is of charge capture and coding on an EMR and what the ideal would be in their minds. Can I say one other thing about that, about the gap? I think there's also, as Matthew alluded to, there's a pretty big gap in terms of just thinking through the coding. And that is, just because we can deliver coding information to physicians, just because we can deliver feedback to them about how it should be coded, doesn't necessarily mean that's an appropriate thing to do, because feedback where it's not going to be used or where it's going to slow a physician down is not progress at all. And one of the things we really believe in about this gap is that if you automate your clinical practice and you move forward as it relates to meaningful use and getting rid of the clinically related paper in your organization, that should not, by definition, be a step backward in the billing process. And that's a gap that's being created. A step forward in the clinical function should not be a step backward in getting paid in a physician's office. That's a big gap.
There's also a fundamental disconnect between what EMR vendors are developing right now and what their customers want. That development cycle for the next 3 to 5 years is being driven heavily by meaningful use. That's being negotiated in Washington, D.C., and is for the most part out of the individual practice's hands. They can make their opinions known, but what's driving vendor development schedules is really meaningful use, and that's not going to change for the next 3 to 5 years. They're really tied to that. Is there development time available to handle small processes like this to make that smoother for the practice? Probably some, but that's not the great chunk of the development time. There's going to be that disconnect between what the customer wants and what the vendor can provide when there's an interruption in the marketplace like this.
That's a great point. If you think about it, this artificial force in the marketplace of Washington delivering dollars via high tech is in fact moving vendor focus for improving the product away from customers and to Washington, D.C. And that's not a very good place for sophisticated and excellent software development to be generated from.